Welcome to Inside Startup Investing, the only podcast where you can invest in every guest. On this episode, I will be speaking with the founder and CEO of Cleveland Whiskey, Tom Lix. As a reminder, if you like what you hear on today's episode, you can invest in Cleveland Whiskey on WeFunder, regardless of whether or not you're accredited, with a minimum investment of $100 until May 1st, 2026. Cleveland Whiskey will always have a nostalgic place in my heart because for me, it was my first ever equity crowdfunding investment back on May 16th, 2016, the first day that Reg CF was legally launched in the United States. I would certainly say Tom Lix is a pioneer of the equity crowdfunding space because few had the guts back then to take the leap of faith on raising money in this new way. Since then, this innovative whiskey company that started out with a focus on its innovation of being able to create great tasting whiskey in hours rather than years has evolved quite a bit and gone through its struggles for sure. But one thing has always remained true about Tom. Tom is one of the more resilient founders I have ever met and transparent. In fact, I have received quarterly updates with incredible details for almost 10 years now. One of the only founders I have ever seen do that. And he has stuck to building this business even when it seemed an impossible hill to climb. Today, the business looks totally different from when I initially invested. From its massive new facility that can produce infinitely more than the first facility they started in, with amazing real estate assets behind it, to their heavy focus on growing their business internationally in countries like India, to its far larger line of products. Perhaps as an investor, the thing that excites me most about Cleveland Whiskey is that I trust the founder to do everything in his power to see this through to an exit for investors. And I see his willingness to be creative in the face of adversity to position this company for growth in a market where whiskey sales have declined precipitously in the United States. But here he is standing up a business over 3 years in India to capture the up-and-coming, fast-growing whiskey market of India. I like backing founders personally that step up when times get tough. And by the end of this conversation, Tom had me really excited about the future of Cleveland Whiskey after years of investing to build a whiskey business that could scale rapidly and internationally. It's exciting times at Cleveland Whiskey, and I always enjoy my chats with Tom. I hope you will too. So let's take a listen and dive in with Tom. For those who don't know you, and I've had the great opportunity of getting to know you over the past many years, tell us a little bit about yourself and what is Cleveland Whiskey all about?
I guess I call myself a whiskey entrepreneur at this point, but I've gone through a couple of different lifetimes, it seems, doing this. I run a technology company in the whiskey space. I've been doing it for a number of years now and still having fun with it.
Love that. I want us to dig a little deeper on Cleveland Whiskey and what differentiates you as a whiskey brand versus all the other ones that are out there on the shelves.
Well, it's interesting, and I probably would have answered this very differently a couple months ago. Whiskey right now as an industry is in the doldrums. It's down everywhere. The big brands are laying people off. The craft brands are going out of business. Last year alone, 1 out of every 4 craft brands went out of business. It's not a good industry to be in. And if we were just a regular craft brand, I would recommend not investing in a company like us. But we are a technology company and that happens to be in the craft whiskey business. That's what makes us different. We started with the technology. We've continued investing in that, doing research in it. And along the way, we've created some sort of unique whiskeys, but we've also created some concentrates that we are now selling into the India market. And we've done some exciting things there, and I hope to tell you more about them in a little bit.
One of the things that always stuck out to me, and I had the opportunity to kind of actually visit one of your first facilities, and I believe you've now moved on to a new, bigger facility, is the ability to create high-end, great-tasting whiskey, but instead of taking years to age, it could literally take hours or days or weeks. Tell us about that technology. Is that still at the forefront of what you're doing, and how does that help differentiate you in the market as well?
Well, that's sort of where we started. And we were able to do things a little bit faster, which allowed us to do, it sped up our research and development, incredibly. I think that's what really mattered to us. And we wound up being able to mature whiskeys with other woods. Every other whiskey in the world, they age and mature the whiskeys in oak barrels, and you use oak because if you made barrels out of other woods, they would pretty much leak like a sieve. But we use woods like black cherry and hickory and apple, all sorts of orchard woods. And because we have our process in stainless steel pressure capable tanks, and we use essentially a pressure aging process, we can get some amazing, interesting flavors into our whiskeys that nobody else can really do. There are people certainly played around the edges of accelerated aging. I don't think of ourselves as doing that. We're really a company that works on different flavor profiles we can get from those other woods. But along the way, we also found that we could infuse much deeper, much more flavor into a given unit of whiskey than you normally would do. And that's what led us into some of these other markets where you had high taxes, high tariffs, things that were preventing us from exporting into other countries. And we were lucky enough to come across some of the Asian markets, specifically India at this point, where they had a market niche essentially called Indian-made foreign liquor. And it happens to be the largest niche in the world. India buys more and consumes more whiskey than any country in the world, partly because they have more people than any country in the world, but they drink whiskey. And, it happens to be a pretty bifurcated market. There's a sliver of high income people, but there's also a lot of more lower income people, and they needed a whiskey that was lower priced. We really can't export our product there and put it at a price on a shelf that was going to be reasonable unless you sent whiskey over there that they could blend with Indian-made foreign liquors. So that's why it's called IMFL, Indian-made foreign liquors. There's a big market for that, and there's plenty of Scotch whiskey and lesser amounts, but increasing amounts of American-made liquor, both malt liquor and bourbon, that is blended with these Indian-made foreign liquors. The problem is, in order to make it effective for the market over there, you've got to grant some fairly good flavors, so you're mixing at fairly high ratios of the imported whiskey to the Indian-made liquors. But importing our concentrates, you don't have to import as much, you don't have to use as much. We can sell something in there that gives them great value, gives us great margins, and cutting to the chase, we formed a company over there in 2022 anticipating we could move into that market, set up a distribution network, did all of R&D, created this concentrate with the technology that we've been using for these other things, went to my first trade show just a couple of months ago, came back with an order for 5 Pro rupees, which is the equivalent of about $563,000. My first visit there, came back with our largest order yet, and I've got 6 more orders in the queue that we just have to finalize. I'm going back probably in April, if not sooner. It is a game changer for us. So, the idea of us sort of selling into this, a sort of waning market in the US and in the UK where it's problematic and everybody's down and everybody's laying people off, we're pivoting very quickly into not only India, but India is a gateway into Southeast Asia and into Africa. Our financials suck, just like, excuse my language, but they do. And just like any other small and actually large distillery or, alcohol company in the market right now. And, if you looked at our numbers, you'd say, my God, why should I invest in a company like this? And I would do the same thing. But, you should throw away that and look at what we've done in the last couple of months and look at what we're about to do over the next couple of years. And because we're a technology company, we're doing that. A big change for us, a big turnaround. And we're not the same company we were 2 years ago. We're not the same company we were 10 years ago when I think we first talked.
Yeah, let's get into this kind of pivot or evolution towards, focusing more on the international markets. First off, will investors benefit from the international market kind of division, subsidiary, whatever you want to call it? And as you think 2-3 years out, what portion of your revenues is made up of kind of this international versus US-based domestic business?
So we formed a company over there called Ella Spirits, essentially for us to export directly there and create sort of a distribution hub. We own 49% of the company, but understand that we make margin by selling to Ella Spirits, number one, and then we make margin again in profits through Ella Spirits. So we sort of get a double whammy from that. So investors, it's a good deal for investors. How much in terms of proportion of revenue? I fully expect that over the next couple of years, we're going to see 95% of our revenue coming from exports. And that'll be into India, that'll be Southeast Asia, and that'll be Africa. It's going to change how we do business completely. Now, in the meantime, we also bought 2 buildings here in Cleveland. One of those a historic building. We've gone from a small, 2,500 foot, very crowded system where we didn't have the capacity to really do anything of significance into 45,000 square feet in 2 buildings, one a historic building here in the Flats. We've made some major investments here. We've sort of gone to a whole new generation of equipment and systems and built the infrastructure, the sort of utility infrastructure and the information technology infrastructure to add capacity very quickly. And I'm glad we built it because we're going to need this now into the buildings that we have here. So I think we're in a wonderful position for really changing this company and turning it around. It's also interesting because, when I started this company, over 10 years ago, I really thought we would be a mark for acquisition fairly quickly because the technology we have would have a great return on investment with the larger companies. At scale, it does beautifully. And we modeled that and we talked to a couple of the big guys, Pernod and Diageo, and I really thought they'd pick us up. The problem is they have such a vested interest in this whole mystique of it takes time, it takes patience. And I think, especially the older generations there, it was hard for them to sort of think about how could they possibly, change the nature of their business to take, even though there was risk reduction, cost savings, all sorts of things that they could do that. And they wouldn't be in the mess they are right now with all this inventory in the rick houses that they can't sell if they were using our technology. But I think, we don't have the same issues. It doesn't have the same sort of problems that in India. The technology is more acceptable in Southeast Asia. It's more acceptable in Africa. People see that as a positive as opposed to people, the traditionalists thinking of it as heresy here in the U.S. So it might have them take a second look or a third look at us again. So the idea that we might be sold for, hopefully a high multiple it might turn that around. I wouldn't be surprised. And if nothing else, I think it's going to generate a lot of cash for us.
I know very little about the Indian market. The only things that I know from kind of, hearsay and whatever I've heard out there in the world is it can be very bureaucratic and very slow when it comes to business and challenging to maneuver. So when you think about even kind of near-term impact, and I think of that as kind of the next 12 months, are you going to realize, you think millions in sales from it, or is it going to be a challenge and maybe it takes 2-3 times the amount of time you think?
Well, so we started this company, Ella Spirits, in 2022. So it's taken us a little bit of time to sort of go through bureaucracy and get the permits in place. The people that we've started with are ex-bureaucrats. So, and I had heard the same things. So purposely picked the right people to be in place. It turns out that a lot of the people who invest in whiskey brands in India are government officials. So one of the things we're doing we're setting up small joint ventures with those government officials, and they put some money in, and we develop a brand for them. So we export the concentrate, they develop, and we put together a brand for them. We create all the product, and then they own that brand, and they go to market with it. So they're responsible for selling it. And where the issues are, in terms of permits and processes, and where the hangups are all the things that those particular ministers control. So we get through the hoops doing it that way. So I think we've come up with sort of a unique little process of getting through a lot of that. I not that there won't be hurdles, but we recognize them, and I think we're coming up with some rather unique solutions.
As you're kind of going through this change towards the international focus, a lot of it having to do with kind of this fallout of the American market and how things have changed in terms of the whiskey market in the U.S., which has struggled for sure.
Yep.
When did you start hearing rumblings from maybe the distributors you work with and stuff where they're starting to pull back on their orders, so on and so forth, and saying, hey, whiskey's not coming off the shelves, we're not going to buy this stuff? When did that start happening? And how have you kind of, managed in the meantime as you transition to international?
So I think it was while we were in COVID. So even though whiskey sales were really up during COVID, as I was thinking about it and looking at the data, and I'm very data driven, I was concerned that yeah, people were buying it a lot, but they weren't necessarily consuming it more. Uh, so I realized that people were stocking their shelves. They were filling their pantries and I thought that was going to be a problem as we pulled out of COVID.
Hmm.
And that was one of the issues coming out is that everybody had stocked up. So the retail stores had stocked up and the individual consumers had stocked up. And so one of the things that slowed us down coming out of COVID was, okay, now we don't have to buy anymore because now we're going to drink maybe what we already have. And sure enough, that was one of the factors early on, at least coming out of the COVID. And that's what everybody blamed the initial slowdown. But at the same time, we had, and even though I think it gets more media than it really is, we had an increase in the sort of factor of no alcohol and low alcohol and more health information. And so I think that's another factor. And we do our own R&D on low alcohol and no alcohol products. Although, if you try any of those products that are in the market today, if you don't mix it in a cocktail, they're really not very good. Even the ones that we've developed so far, I wouldn't serve them to anybody that I like, without mixing them in with something that has a lot of sugar and a lot of flavor. And then there's, Gen Z, which, everybody talks about and nobody really knows what they've decided yet. I'm not sure that, and not surprisingly, and I don't blame them. They haven't decided what they want yet either, so we don't know what direction that's going to take. And then, so all those factors are sort of, I think, contributing in lots of ways. And there's lots of experts out there saying, well, it's this, and no, it's this, and no, it's that. So we don't really know. But, and then, this whole tariff chaos that's going on, that plays into it as well. Right now we don't have a Canadian market for, our products here. That's a factor. We don't really export to Europe like we were. And that started back in, late 2017, 2018 with the first round of tariff chaos. So, there's a whole lot of factors. And because we don't know what's really happening and because there's a lot of uncertainty around it, people are betting on getting back into Europe, but I'm not. I don't think it's a good time to do that and move in that direction.
You start moving towards this focus on the international market, and you've built this new factory with far more production capacity. Would love to understand volume-wise what you think you could do from a revenue perspective, and even just like how much whiskey does it actually mean in your new facility, at kind of max capacity, and where you think that'll be.
So I don't think I know yet what those numbers are because I think that I think they're going to be bigger than any number I could give you at the moment. But when we moved from our existing facility, we boosted capacity immediately by 3 to 4x. So that was a big move for us. But I'm now adding additional systems, and we planned for this coming over that'll take us to 12x our original capacity. I've got the infrastructure built in to double that, so we'll be at 24x. But we've also been doing a whole lot of work on our equipment and some of the other things associated with it that will allow us to reduce our processing time. Right now, our processing time is just about 24 hours per batch. And we can get it down to about 16 hours, but that doesn't really do us any good. If I can get it under, I think this is our target, 7.5 hours, then I can go to multiple shifts. And then I can take whatever we're doing and I can go to 2 shifts. I can ultimately really, if I 2 shifts and maybe a shift for maintenance, that'll increase our capacity, again, without it adding CapEx. So we're talking about a lot. I'm not talking about shipping in bottles anymore. I'm talking about, first of all, now I'm shipping in 18,000 liter units. So I'm shipping 18 totes into a container. Then I'm talking about shipping in 26,000 liter ISO tanks. And that I think we'll be doing probably by the end of next year. I don't know what the numbers are, but they're going to be a lot bigger than we ever even planned or anything that's in the business plan that I updated 6 months ago.
When you look at the valuation, you were one of the pioneers, and we'll get into this in a minute, of doing crowdfunding. Your valuation has come up. You talked about having kind of a tough financial year. Some people might struggle with that. Well, how do you value yourself there? Unlike, kind of a tech company, right? One of the things that I think goes into valuation, and would like to get your perspective on, is the facility, right? And the assets and the IP even that you've built around this technology, process great whiskey far faster and at larger volumes. That's certainly a part of the equation. Then it sounds like, there's maybe things that are not in the numbers, building this new international market, so on and so forth. So what would you say to those who are kind of trying to grapple with valuation versus where the financials are today?
I mean, I think valuation is sort of funny, and who knows what it is. I mean, you could put a finger up in the wind and see where it lands. One of the other, this is sort of a backstop on our valuation. We bought these two buildings sort of in a backwater part of Cleveland. It wasn't really developed. It was sort of an area that hadn't been developed. It was right on the river, really beautiful location. One of them is a historic building that had been neglected, and I wanted to really bring it back to life. But about 3 days after we bought these buildings, there was a big announcement that said that whole area was going to be redeveloped and bought up by this development company called Bedrock, and they're doing a $3.6 billion improvement to that whole waterfront area. And right next to us, essentially neighbors, within 200 feet of us, they're starting that project. And they've already started it. They are building a new Cavaliers, the NBA team, training facility, as well as a Cleveland Clinic sports therapy center. So those buildings are already going up. They're redoing our streets. They're putting all the utilities underground, and they haven't announced it yet, but word is that they're putting a and they've put in one already, new entertainment complex right next to our sort of storage center. We have two buildings. One's a distillery, another one is a barrel storage center. So the buildings themselves have probably, I don't know how much they've gone up, but I know they've gone up significantly. I could sell them
Sure.
for, not that I want to sell them, but I could sell them for a whole lot more. So if nothing else, the basis, the assets of our company have gone up significantly. That wouldn't create the whole valuation of the company, but if nothing else, I know that the buildings themselves have gone up so much more than what they were when I bought them. But valuations are always based on the future. And I think our future is 6 months ago. I couldn't have guessed at what it was going to be.
Let's talk about resiliency. You started this thing 10 years ago. You've been in market for a long time. You've had ups, you've had downs, you've had struggles, right? And you're still at it, and you're still evolving and figuring out new things and finding a way forward to get this business to an exit for your investors. Why do you stick with it? There's so many distilleries and breweries that have closed down in the last year or two. Why stick with it? What keeps you going?
Well, we did have 6 years of double-digit revenue growth. We had 4 years of profitability, and I thought we were on the right track until this sort of slump, hit us. It wasn't growing, as fast as I expected, and I thought we could do better. And I really did think by this time we would have sold to another company, but there were headwinds, really against the whole sort of premise of what we were doing, and the bias against using technology and science in spirits. But I think what keeps me going is that we're discovering new things all the time. And the beauty of what we do is that we can test out our theories and ideas and get feedback really quickly. I don't have to put, say, okay, we're going to make something new and put it in a barrel, and then after 2 years, maybe taste it and see if it's any good, and then say, okay, it's good, let's put it back in the barrel and wait another 2 years and try it again. And maybe at the 8-year mark, we say, oh yeah, this is really good. Let's make some more of it. I don't have to do that. I can, within a week, I can start with an idea and make it and test it again and have it in consumer testing by the end of the week and say, okay, we've got something really good here. That, to me, I just love it. It's manufacturing, but it's at a pace that nobody in this industry can even imagine. And that, that keeps me up at night in a good way. I love coming into work, and yeah, it's just a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And I do think I always say to entrepreneurs who are thinking about building something, like, you really got to love it, because that's the only thing that keeps you there when everything goes to shit, right? For lack of a better word.
Otherwise you couldn't do it, because there are downtimes. There are times when, you've got to worry about making payroll. You got to worry. I mean, any business like this, yes, there are downtimes. Yes, there are times where you've got to mortgage everything. You got to put everything into it. You worry that you can't make payroll the next day. We've had those ups and downs. I look at cash balances every day, and it's difficult. You got to choose what to pay, when to pay it. And, today I'm good. So, that's fine.
One of the other things that I'll just say is with all of this stuff, if I've learned anything, is it's ebbs and flows in the market. Whiskey's out one day and then it's back in the next, right? I know vodka had its moment, in the 80s, and then it fell out, and then it became one of the most popular drinks again. Like, these things, they ebb and flow. Right now, you're in one of the ebbs, I guess. But there's also that reality too that I think about, of just when looking at trend lines. Like, they don't last forever, and I don't think whiskey is actually going anywhere long term. I do think it'll have staying power and go through its ebbs and flows of popularity.
Well, it's in a doldrum here, but it isn't in other places. So that's the key. It's like, we don't have to just sell here in the U.S. We don't just have to sell in Europe. It's like, okay, let's find another place to sell it. It's a good product. We make a good product. Let's just go around the corner and sell it there.
Well, it actually makes a ton of sense to me that, like, you're almost providing this concentrate, right, to make whiskey internationally, because, again, it goes to that whole idea that you can provide something better, faster, cheaper to allow them to sell a product in the market that people want. And it's not about the aging process. It's not about those things. It's about providing something better, faster, cheaper, and that kind of private label, white label, whatever you want to call it. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and it sounds really, really interesting from my perspective, where you could play in the market.
What's one of the things that has gone up in price so much lately? Shipping costs. Mm-hmm. So and when you sell whiskey, what are you shipping? You're shipping water. So if I can concentrate it, that just makes, that makes a lot of sense.
For those investors who are on the line, they're thinking maybe they want to invest, but they're not there yet. I'll give you the last word. What do you want them to know?
I think you get the line. You've got to make a choice, and you either believe that this is something that could be much more valuable in the future, or you don't. If you sit on the sideline, you're never going to know.
If you like what you heard on the show today, you can learn more about why Cleveland Whiskey scored a 3.7 out of 5 on the Kingscrowd proprietary rating scale at kingscrowd.com. You can also invest on WeFunder until May 1st, 2026 with a minimum investment of $100. And as always, if you like what you heard on the show today, please like, subscribe, and share our podcast wherever you listen so more investors like you can find us. Thanks for tuning in, and happy investing.